just before coming to Dakar, the idea around having the remobilizing theme of this AfCoDD was to ensure that we also had a deeper understanding and appreciation of what was happening at the national level. Many of our countries are suffering with a very deep debt crisis, which is not just due to the borrowing that they're doing, but is also being exacerbated by the policy responses that many of our governments are taking, directly linked through the tax policies that are being advised to them by their development partners, which further increases the cost of living. It further deepens the inequality that is currently being experienced in many of our countries. Furthermore, in a space that is constantly and consistently shrinking, activism and advocacy on issues of public finance and debt in particular are becoming extremely sensitive topics to discuss and to have conversations with government. But nonetheless, many of our partners at the national level have managed to brave and weather those storms and continue to mobilize civil society, mobilize citizens, journalists, and members of parliament to force this conversation because it is very important. And so with that, I want to start on my far left with Bertha. In Malawi, the situation, I remember we were there for AfCoDD 2 last year, and just very soon after that, there was a very deep impending crisis where the country nearly collapsed because of the inability to pay its fuel bills. And even though it was able to secure an IMF program, things have continued not to stabilize, and it's now again on the brink of not being able to satisfy some of its creditors. When we had the meeting in Lilongwe earlier this year, just before AfCoDD 3, what are some of the things that were coming up out of that meeting, and how do they resonate with what we've heard here today?
Those Malawi citizens that are treated justly and that they live a dignified life. And we do this through advocacy, research, and capacity building. Now, bringing it down to the question on the table, what are the emerging debt issues that were transpiring during the National Conference of Data and Development in Malawi? Really convened under the theme within the 4 Rs, and particularly on reshaping the development destiny of Malawi. There were a lot of issues that kept coming, but key to it is the fact that Malawi debt crisis is actually posing a significant threat to the Malawi's economic stability and also the development aspirations themselves. We came to realize again that the reduced development spending in the key sectors and critical sectors of health, education, infrastructure, but also poverty reduction efforts. There is literally little investment towards that because government is actually grappling to service the high debt cost. Much more alarming is the little investment towards the national agenda, the Malawi 2063 vision. And again, secondly, to my point is that we also realize through data and aid department that Malawi is losing its credit worthiness, implying that the challenge around accessing the international capital market for favorable markets is actually a tall order in the country. It is actually losing that credit worthiness. But all this are summing up or actually alluding to the fact that Malawi has always been over-dependent on its donor support, which actually at times becomes unpredictable, but also comes with a lot of conditions that cannot actually tally with the status quo. And then lastly, to this question, we came to realize as a national partner that there is actually a weak institutional oversight function. At the time we were gathering already, we learned there were some loan authorization bills that were to be tabled without proper scrutiny and even proper engagement with the parliamentary committee responsible. And so the weak regulation or weak oversight institutions that were actually premised within the issues that came out. And in this context, Malawi government is actually not live or up to the existing debt framework, which is the medium-term debt management strategy 2022 and 2023. And then coming it to champions, which ones would be the champions that we can actually prioritize as a national partner. Really, it all draws back just onto the fact that are we talking about debt cancellation or debt restructuring? Now, for the purposes of being realistic, if we are to talk about debt restructuring, then in the context of Malawi CSOs, we're saying the key champions to engage is actually the residence offices of the IMF, World Bank, but also the European Union. Much more the development partners that constituted the CAPS, the Common Approach Budgetary Support. Why? Because all this, like I already alluded to, is actually as the consequence of the withdrawal of their support. And critical to it, we are saying the commercial banks, they are the ones that also we need to target. Outside targeting the parliamentary committees, the commercial banks remain very key to the process, because at large, the domestic debt is actually with the commercial banks in Malawi. But going forward, the aspect of monitoring for future loan contraction remains key for the CSOs in Malawi. What we are saying, we would want to venture into a complete or advocacy towards complete reshuffle of debt contracting process. In this regards, we would want to dive into the amendment of the standing orders of Parliament that provides extensive consultations to the CSOs and local Malawians in the process. Lastly, just so let me indicate that the concept of citizen engagement and the social accountability monitoring remains key for the CSOs in Malawi, particularly through the national conference outcomes that we came across with. Thank you, and let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Bertha. And I think this is a good point to segue to John in Zimbabwe, just across the road. The last point that Bertha mentioned, and I know it's very relevant to the meeting we had, about rethinking or reshuffling the debt contracting process so that there is more public participation. In Zimbabwe, over the last couple of years, there have been some positive signs where, you know, the civil society groups have taken the Ministry of Finance to court and received some very positive responses from the court, and in terms of debt transparency. How, with the ongoing arrears clearance program also that is being discussed and negotiated, how do we use this opportunity with the national debt meetings that ZimCoD has been organizing to ensure that we continue to empower the judiciary, but also ensure that the arrears clearance program is not sidetracked by other processes that are currently ongoing?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason, for that question. And to thank you for the highlights you just gave, Beth, as well. So in Zimbabwe, the debt question remains one of the key economic reforms question. With regards to debt contraction, there's been a lot of lack of transparency around that, and most of the times Parliament engaged as a post-de facto incident, mostly to rubber stamp when loans have already been acquired. And this is one of the things that ZimCoD took the Ministry of Finance to the High Court against, to ensure that there is an alignment of the Public Debt Management Act with the Constitution, because the Constitution provides that all loans must be approved by Parliament prior to contraction. But the Public Debt Management Act was guaranteeing different provisions, allowing for the Minister of Finance to actually contract loans without parliamentary approval. And so this alignment is one of the victories that we have won. So in terms of opportunities, Jason, I think that for us is to continue to engage citizens in the process of debt justice advocacy. It has to be a movement building element around this. For ZimCoD, we did not just put ourselves on the front, but we worked with citizens. There were actually individual citizens that stood in as litigants in that particular court application that we won at the High Court, and also partnering with other organizations. Then, of course, you rightly put it, there is need for continuous engagement with the relevant stakeholders to ensure that the message is put across and that there is a shared and common understanding of the problem that a debt crisis can bring about to the economy. But I need to also allude to the fact that there is an opportunity for us to continue to engage under the structural dialogue platform that is ongoing in Zimbabwe. This is our own unique process to debt resolution in Zimbabwe, and it's facilitated by the FDB president. It's also championed by the former president of Mozambique, H.E. Chisano. And the process has set out 3 matrices that Zimbabwe has to pass, and these include governance reforms, economic reforms, and the land tenure reforms. And I must highlight that there is room for us to continue to influence progress towards economic reforms, stabilizing the macroeconomic policies. And then around governance reforms, one of the litmus tests was, the conduct of free and fair elections, which the elections we just had last week. And then the land tenure reforms is around the global compensation deed, whereby there is need to compensate former farm owners and issue debt backing to 2000, the year 2000. So, and also guaranteeing property rights. So there is a lot of work to be done with regards to making headways towards finding a lasting resolution with creditors in Zimbabwe. But there is room for winning and registering some milestones around that. I want to again register that in terms of debt transparency, regular, publications and information dissemination around, debt statistics has improved in Zimbabwe, and that has been acknowledged. And also, there is willingness to engage with the relevant authorities around issues of debt management. So we continue to position ourselves as a partner, as a stakeholder around that. We have also been invited several times to provide technical assistance to the relevant ministry and departments around that. But much can still be done.
Thank you very much, John, for that. And again, it's always very encouraging when we talk about fixing things from within. I know many of our speakers from Wednesday have been talking about that, and especially in very difficult environments and conditions, that there are institutions of governance that are still willing to be confident enough to stand up against those that try to pull the wool over our eyes when it comes to issues of public financial management. And I think the judiciary in this instance in Zimbabwe, needs to be appreciated for those very brave rulings that they have provided in holding the government to account and supporting civil society asks for greater transparency. And again, it's a very nice way to segue to Kenya, where perhaps on issues of public financial management, we perhaps don't have that luxury in some of our governance institutions. But Diana, the regime has been vocal in talking a very good game on trying to deal with the public debt situation in Kenya. But when one looks at the numbers and what has happened, just in 2023, 2 credit rating downgrades, a potential default of its Eurobond in 2024, and scamping around trying to raise money to ensure that they don't default. What were the emerging issues coming out of the meeting in Kenya when you had the chance to engage with officials and civil society in that sense?
The Kenyan context, as Jason has rightly put it, this is the first year and the first budget cycle since President Dr. William Samoei Ruto took over power and promised to ensure there is fiscal discipline, act on the escalating debt, and so on. So that's the context that Okoa Uchumi, the civil society coalition in Kenya, was operating in. Just before we convened the debt conference, we received the first budget of the government and the proposals therein. No budget cuts, just another big budget. A big budget for a country that has had budget deficit over the years means more borrowing. So as civil society, we convened this particular conference against a background where we had engaged our executive, treasury, and parliament at length, and to a point where it got adversarial. I know there are colleagues here who felt wanted in Kenya for the engagement that they had with members of parliament. But we convened the meeting nevertheless, and what was interesting was, first, parliament was very keen to work with civil society on this particular debt conference. Actually, the initial plan was that we would co-convene the National Debt Conference with Parliament. Halfway, they hesitated and said, I think this debt issue affects all parliamentary committees, so you proceed, convene the first consultations. We will have in attendance our Finance and Planning Committee, as well as the Public Debt and Privatization Committee. And thereafter, come and guide us on what to do on the public debt issue. And they have kept their word. They attended the meeting, members of parliament, and they stayed throughout the session. And I think yesterday, they have extended the invite to the civil society coalition in Kenya to go and advise them on what to do on the debt question. So we expected a situation where we had punched so hard that they would have been hesitant. But there is a recognition that this is a problem that requires all hands on deck. So that's the first area. It was Parliament, and Parliament committed to a number of things. One was to lead the country in conducting a debt audit, together with the Office of the Auditor General. Few months before we convened the National Debt Conference, we had problems raised by the Auditor General that she's unable to audit our public debt because the paperwork just doesn't align. So it was very, very, it was very, very encouraging to see Parliament say they will take up this thing. I've deviated a bit, so we focused on 3 areas or 3 things. This is a mantra currently in Kenya. Our president is serious on corruption, and he's doing 3 things. You either go to jail, you go to heaven, or you go to exile. So when we convened this, we also had 3 things or 3 areas to focus. And the first one was the people. Why? Because this is public debt. It affects the people, but they do not understand. And what stood out for me from the conference were 2 participants. The first one was a young person who was fresh out of high school. She sat through the entire conference, and when plenary was open, she asked, "Why do we keep studying about volcanoes that will never erupt in our lifetime? Why are we studying about faults? Yet, when I finish high school, the first thing I am faced with is this reality that you people are speaking about here. Public debt, fiscal discipline, public finance management that I have never heard of in my 12 years of schooling." And she challenged all of us in civil society and in government, and we took a resolution that it is time that these discussions cannot be had when you're an adult. They must start early, because the impact of public debt and issues of fiscal accountability are intergenerational. So that was a highlight and one of the things that we will carry. And the second one was a woman who runs informal trade, and she came to the conference because her business was collapsing, the taxes were too much, the government fees was too high. And then she said she came here so that she understands, but she's so lost. She's so lost because of the jargon, the vocabulary used. She has no hope of ever understanding issues of public debt, economy, and so on. And that was yet another challenge, that if we are to remobilize and lead people to rethink, then we must communicate the problem of public debt in Africa in a language that the masses understand. So that's around the people. With Parliament, what stood out was, one, the parliamentarians who came were challenged. There has been a conversation that Parliament does not understand their role. They have approved very many, all the debt in Kenya is odious and so on. So first was a Parliament that now seems keen to defend their role as the holders of the government, of the public purse, of debt, and the proponents of the fact that Parliament has approved all debt irregularly, actually toned down because of the clear stances that were taken by our parliamentarians during this particular process, and a commitment to public participation, that they would moving forward ensure that budgetary processes, public debt processes would have more expansive public participation. In the end, Parliament challenged us, just like the president of Gabon, ex-president, make some noise, civil society. Things are bad. Things are really bad. So that was another highlight and encouragement that Parliament knows that we must defend the civic space when it comes to public debt. Then finally, there was consensus in the room. Look, We must move from resilience, endurance that is brought to us by the international financial institution. We must move from structural adjustment. I think Kenya has extended credit facilities. We have a resilience fund from IMF, to conviction that IFIs do not have our interest, they do not have our solutions. That's the message that the National Debt Conference in Kenya brings to Dakar. Let us move from resilience to conviction. That the richness of the African continent must be utilized now. We can no longer be beggars. That we must be courageous enough. We took a resolution that borrowing within the East African community should take a local currency. Right now, most governments are in panic because we all borrowed in foreign currency. The currency fluctuation means we now have so much more money to pay. Before we establish the institutions that are already set out in the African Union document, can we already be bold enough to say, moving forward, or even go tell these creditors, we will pay back what we owed in our local currency then, because all this money is just reparations. You took it from us a long time ago. So you cannot now set conditions. Let us become convicted Africans, resolute Africans who know our worth and are no longer beggars, who are resilient and tolerant enough to continue being violated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana, for that. And again, a very nice way to bring in Isaac, because, you know, from one country where the IMF is perpetuating dependency and begging to Zambia, where, depending where you sit, the IMF is being lauded as the institution that has saved the country from collapse. But Zambia is a very interesting case because, you know, like in the 80s and 90s when we had structural adjustment, Ghana was the leading light, the shining example, purportedly. Zambia is the first country to actually work through the G20 common framework and come to some partial deal with some of its creditors in terms of restructuring its debt servicing payments, but also having to implement an extremely difficult IMF program. And so to what extent, you know, building on what Bertha, John, Diana, what is coming out from those three countries, are there some similarities or sentiments that are coming out of Zambia when it comes to the issue of public debt and the role of the IFIs, particularly the role of the IMF when it comes to fiscal consolidation and austerity?
There are quite a lot of similarities with what is happening in countries like Kenya in terms of the problem that we are facing pertaining to public debt. And this is part of what dominated the national AfCoDD conference that we convened in partnership with AfCoDD more recently. And in looking at some of the key issues that came out prominently from the meeting that we held, we focused so much on reflecting on some of the experiences that Zambia has had with treatment of its debt under the G20 common framework. One of the key observations has been the challenge that we have had in terms of getting our debt restructured in good time. And one of the recent developments pertaining to the G20 common framework has been speaking to the deal that the country managed to get more recently, where part of its debt was to be restructured. That is the bilateral debt that the country has. But that in itself has not yet resolved the challenge, because we still have a significant component of our debt, which is to the private creditors, that has not yet been restructured. And as you reflect on the two components of the debt, you also realize that the bilateral option, or the bilateral portion of our debt, equally was resolved in a manner that still is likely to leave us in serious problems. Within the principles that have been agreed on how the debt can be restructured, there are clauses of provisions that are likely to prove problematic as we go. An example that I can cite in this platform is on our debt carrying capacity. So there are provisions within these principles that are indicating that should there be an improvement in the performance of our economy, our debt carrying capacity will actually also be changed, meaning that we'd have to increase the amounts that we're expected to pay. And from the civil society, we find such provisions to be quite problematic and not entirely sorting out the problem that we have as a country. I think the second aspect of the debt challenge in our country is the way our leaders are communicating the outcomes from the G20 Common Framework. So there is this message that is being shared with the public that seems to give an impression that our debt has been resolved. Our debt has been cancelled. And to a larger extent, what we are seeing is that this is misinformation, because our debt has not been cancelled. And we still have the obligations that we need to be paying related to public debt. And we see that as a big gap that we need to start contributing to within the work that we are doing within the civil society space. Added to that is the challenges related to the reforms that we are implementing. As you may be aware, Jason, the country is now under an extended credit facility from the International Monetary Fund, which is running for the next 36 months, which is about 3 years. So embedded within the extended credit facility are provisions that are speaking to social and economic reforms that the country needs to undertake. So on one hand, you see the language seeming the need to increase allocation of resources towards social protection. On the other hand, we are also seeing reforms that are negating some of the potential benefits that can be derived from the social reforms. Examples include reforms that have happened in the energy sector. So if you look at some of the reforms in the energy sector, they are speaking to an increase in tariffs, which makes access to electricity quite high. That is also feeding into challenges that those that are into productive sectors, local manufacturing, and because of that, it means that prices of goods would also become expensive, and that burden is ultimately passed on to the consumer. But besides that, we also have fuel prices that have been quite unstable for some time. As of yesterday, there were upward adjustments, and almost on a monthly basis, there are adjustments on fuel, which is actually making it quite hard for businesses to plan, but equally for consumers. So these are some of the issues that from the civil society we are actively mobilizing and engaging in, because we'll be on the extended credit facility for quite some time. Lastly, I would also want to speak to the burden around domestic resource mobilization. Due to some of these reforms that have been instituted as a result of being on the extended credit facility, we are also seeing the Zambia Revenue Authority struggling to meet some of the targets that are related to mobilizing resources locally. And if you look at some of the reforms, especially those that have been instituted in the mining sector, where a lot of incentives have been provided because of the program that we are on, it now makes it difficult for us to mobilize resources within to finance our development aspirations. And as a result, we are now resorting more to borrowing, even if there's a change in terms of narrative speaking to the fact that now we will not be borrowing from commercial sources, whatever source we borrow from, ultimately it still becomes debt, and it will still fall on our books and will ultimately be expected to pay. So if you look at what is happening now, the language is shifting, and our politicians and our leaders are now emphasizing more on the need to focus on private-public partnerships. And this is now seen as an alternative model to borrowing from commercial sources. But what we are also not discussing or having a conversation around is who ultimately pay for those PPPs. Because if a road is constructed and they put a lot of toll gates, the ultimate person that will get to pay, it still falls on the citizens. So there are still big challenges related to public debt, and the work that we've been doing collectively is work that can help to continue highlighting on how government can explore alternatives that will ease the burden on citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. And I think highlighting also the challenges that come with having to implement an IMF program. And I think that is a huge lesson in this room for us to take away from these past 3 days, that it's not as easy, to implement those programs as much as they are very quick to come in and be very happy to make us sign them. We must interrogate exactly what is happening when these credit facilities are being put before our parliaments and being put before our national treasuries. And there are lots of lessons of how it is, the perception that they are giving with one hand, but they are certainly taking, with the other in the same breath. Leaving also on public services, their sister next door, the World Bank, to come and pick up the pieces through their very innovative, what they call innovative blended finance, public-private partnership type approach. So, and I think with that, I wanted to bring in Martin, because a couple of years ago, we did do a documentary in Cameroon, and there was a very telling story about how a medical practitioner was giving his view of how they understand or they can see government borrowing in millions of dollars, but he had to, fuel his own little boat and go to an island in order and use his own money to dispense health facilities to a community. And that sort of sentiment is one that we're hearing in terms of, the debt not being felt by citizens or being felt in a positive way by citizens. The feeling it's more negative, it's extractive, it deprives us of accessing public services. So in the Cameroon meeting, what were the kind of things that were coming out in that sense?
In the Cameroon meeting, one of the things that we had has to do with people's participation in how to reshape the debt management situation in the country. Because the country now is in a situation where the debt level is such that the country is at risk of debt distress. So the meeting gave an opportunity to a number of stakeholders to come together and reflect on what are the urgent things that need to be done and how this should be done to make sure that that situation is changed, and not only change within the country, but change in relation to what is happening on the continent. So there were a number of things at stake during the discussions that we had during that conference in Cameroon. So the debt management system was reviewed. That is because the country has a debt strategy, debt management strategy. That was reviewed. And the parliamentarians' role was also put to discussion. And then the reform of public finance was on the table, because debt management has to do with that reform. And also the impact of illicit financial flow on the use of domestic resources for development, and then different stakeholders were asked to bring their perspective. What is interesting here is, and which comes to relate to what we heard from other countries, is that the parliamentarians were very keen to be part of this movement of changing the debt situation in Africa, and they took a number of commitments. And they also said they are not going to wait until something is done elsewhere before they table that at Parliament. They insisted that the very next parliamentarian session will see some of the outcome of the conference put on discussion with the government. And one key thing that emerged is the way they thought this could be done. They said this could better be done if the civil society and parliamentarian could get into a kind of affiliation or a common work framework to see how they support the government in changing the situation. And part of the discussion was also about how the people could influence this process. If a process comes to be where parliamentarians and the civil society work to accompany the government toward a better debt management situation, how would the people influence that? So a number of things came to as a recommendation on how people could influence that. I'm going to pick some of these because we shared the outcome of the conference, and I think the organizers will be able to share that with all the participants here. But I'm going to pick some of these recommendations for us to comment here. Among the things that were said should be done, they didn't just say what should be done, they also set the preconditions. That is, what are the preconditions for the things that will be done? What are the preconditions that we need to have? Now, let's go to how the people could influence any process that comes, because I'm picking just this for us to comment. By ensuring proper supervision of public debt management. I'm picking these looking at the discussions that we had the 2 past days to see how what happened in Cameroon is in linkage with what we discussed here. And by getting involved in the formulation of a continental common position on debt management or debt reform. The civil society could collaborate with policy makers in building their capacity, because there was one of the things that came out is that there are times where policymakers may lack capacity on some of the issues that relate to debt. So the civil society should look at ways to collaborate with policymakers to build their capacity on dealing with debt issues. Then, the civil society should also continue to push for the enactment of laws on illicit financial flows, and also should do something to make sure that anything at continental level which has been initiated is really implemented. So these are some of the things that came out of the conference. And you can see that these relate very much with the discussion that we had the 2 last days. And another thing that came out is that they said this is not just about debt management per se. It also has to do with the way we organize our economy in terms of transforming the economy and get things better so that we balance our system before we see how we improve on it by recourse to external resources. So these are some of the things that came out of the conference in Cameroon, and we could discuss more.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. Jean-Pierre, in Benin, we've heard also very much about the role of public participation, the importance of linking the issue of public finance, public debt with the impacts it has on public services. But also transparency and governance is also something that has emerged in some of the discussions and presentations we've heard just a few moments ago. In the case of Benin, is that something that is also important, the role of good governance, the role of public participation in policies, in the making of policies, in the advising of parliaments? Is there that appetite and demand coming from policymakers and parliamentarians to seek the opinions and the recommendations of civil society actors and activists so that they too can be part of this policy-making process in a way that ensures prudent utilization and management of public funds? Are those some of the things that resonate with the discussions that are going on in Benin and during the Social Watch meeting?
Merci. Le cas du Bénin, je voudrais dire, nous sommes un petit pays et nous n'avons pas de ressources naturelles. Bon, nous avons le Nigeria à côté qui a du pétrole, on a le Togo de l'autre côté qui a du pétrole et on se demande pourquoi Dieu a sauté le Bénin. Bon, chaque fois on continue de rechercher, peut-être qu'on aura un jour de ressources. Et donc nous n'avons que le coton comme ressource que nous exportons. Et pourquoi est-ce qu'on s'intéresse aux finances publiques? Parce que nous avons depuis 2016 un gouvernement qui a un programme d'action très ambitieux qui appelle à la mobilisation de beaucoup de ressources extérieures. Je voudrais saluer un travail qu'on a fait avec Open Society Initiative for West Africa pour mettre de l'attention sur comment est-ce que les ressources là sont mobilisées et sont gérées. Nous nous intéressons à la dette parce que le Bénin a révisé sa constitution et les pleins pouvoirs ont été donnés au chef de l'État pour ratifier les accords de prêt et autres. Et il a l'obligation seulement d'informer le Parlement dans un délai de 3 mois. C'était le contraire, mais le chef de l'État que nous avons, c'est un homme d'affaires, il veut aller vite dans le programme d'action du gouvernement. Et donc, il dit qu'il n'a pas le temps de gérer les retards des politiciens. Donc, il a révisé la Constitution dans ce sens. Et le Bénin, mon organisation en tant que Social Watch Bénin, nous sommes l'évaluateur indépendant de International Budget Partnership, IBP. Et nous avons sur l'OBS, donc Open Budget Survey de 2011, nous avons vu que le Bénin est le 2e pays en Afrique en termes de transparence budgétaire derrière l'Afrique du Sud, le 1er pays de l'espace francophone. Nous avons, en tant que c'est un pays où la société civile est engagée dans le suivi des lois de finances, donc du budget de l'État. La société civile a une unité d'analyse du budget et est impliquée dans les différents cycles d'élaboration du budget, de la préparation, donc depuis déjà le mois de janvier, pour dire les aspirations et les besoins de la société civile, et aussi au niveau de la phase d'adoption invitée en audience publique devant la commission des finances pour dire ses observations sur le projet de budget. Au cours de l'exécution et sur les rapports d'exécution et enfin sur le travail de l'institution supérieure de contrôle. Au fait, nous avons beaucoup œuvré pour que le pays se dote d'une institution supérieure de contrôle conformément aux normes et standards internationaux. Donc nous avons eu notre Cour de compte créé par la Constitution seulement en 2019, parce qu'avant, on n'avait pas de cour. On avait une chambre qui était logée à l'intérieur de la Cour suprême. Et cette cour est en train d'être mise en place et se cherche. Et donc, on ne peut pas s'intéresser à la transparence des finances publiques sans s'intéresser à la question de la dette. Et je pense que AfCoDD nous a apporté une conscience au niveau du Bénin, au niveau des acteurs de la société civile, parce que, comme vous le savez, le Bénin fait partie de l'UEMOA, de l'espace économique et monétaire ouest-africain. Et dans l'UEMOA, il y a des normes, on appelle les critères de convergence. Et par rapport à la question de la soutenabilité de la dette, l'UEMOA a retenu 70% du PIB comme seuil à ne pas dépasser. Alors, les pays de l'UEMOA, chaque fois qu'ils sont en dessous donc, de ce seuil, disent bon, on est en dessous du seuil, on n'a pas de risque de surendettement. Et le Bénin aussi est dans ce cas. Et donc, vous voyez le gouvernement, il présente la situation, il dit je suis en dessous du seuil. Mais ce qui a fondamentalement changé au Bénin, puisqu'on parle de la transparence du budget, il y a la transparence aussi donc, dans la gestion de la dette. Le Bénin a créé une direction. Avant, c'était une caisse autonome d'amortissement. Ça a été renommé cette année en caisse autonome de gestion de la dette, qui dispose d'un site web qui publie chaque trimestre des statistiques sur la dette. Le Bénin, les nouvelles autorités, quand elles sont venues, bon, je pense qu'ils ont levé 1 euro bon pour rembourser toutes les dettes à taux variable du Bénin. Donc aujourd'hui, le Bénin n'a aucune dette à taux variable, à taux variable, donc c'est des dettes à taux fixe. Et le Bénin va sur le marché financier en tenant compte d'un certain nombre de paramètres en termes de maturité, en termes de taux d'intérêt, en termes de devises. Et je pense ce que nous avons retenu, le Bénin semble être un bon élève de FMI. Je ne sais pas si nous devons nous en réjouir, mais nous, en tant qu'acteurs de la société civile, l'image que nous avons du FMI, quand on dit que notre pays est bon, on met un point d'interrogation. Si le FMI dit que c'est bon, alors il faut aller regarder. Et je pense que c'est ce que nous avons noté ici, et ces jours-ci, pour dire... nous devons, les pays africains, je parle des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, il n'y a pas assez de partage de la stratégie. Chacun y va selon ses priorités, selon ses intérêts. Et je dirais même que les pays se cachent même leur stratégie. Je ne sais pas, quand nous étions à l'école, on cache les épreuves pour qu'on ne triche pas à notre feuille. Et je pense qu'en matière de dette, c'est ce que chaque pays est en train de faire. Je ne sais pas si c'est pour que les autres n'aillent pas plus prendre sur le marché que... Donc, lors de l'atelier national, nous avons appelé à une solidarité entre les pays en matière de politique et de stratégie d'endettement. J'ai écouté sur RFI Attali qui dit que l'endettement, c'est juste pour déplacer des crises majeures. Que l'endettement est là pour nous cacher les crises financières majeures, les crises économiques majeures qui doivent se produire, mais qu'on essaye de repousser plus loin avec l'endettement. Ce qu'on a retenu quand même au niveau du Bénin, c'est ce que je sais en tant qu'acteur de la société civile au niveau du Bénin, c'est quand même cette transparence. Le gouvernement du Bénin, quand il va sur le marché financier, informe. Je vais sur le marché financier pour lever des fonds pour réaliser tel projet. Des projets qui sont structurants. Je vais sur le marché financier pas pour lever des fonds, pour mettre dans des caisses pour payer les salaires, non. C'est pour des investissements. Et donc, la dette, pour nous, elle est bonne si on peut faire des investissements massifs dans le secteur de l'éducation, de la santé, de l'énergie qui a été rappelée ici. La dette, elle est bonne si les citoyens savent ce à quoi servent les fonds qui sont collectés en leur nom. Je voudrais finir pour rejoindre la collègue du Kenya pour dire que le vocabulaire, le langage de la dette, là, on ne comprend pas. À la société civile, les citoyens ne comprennent pas. Donc, il va falloir, nous, en tant qu'acteurs de la société civile, faire ce qu'on appelle peut-être une alphabétisation, c'est-à-dire trouver les mots accessibles aux citoyens pour qu'ils puissent comprendre, quand nous parlons de la dette publique, que les citoyens puissent comprendre, parce que ce n'est pas évident pour nos populations, au nom desquelles on contraste ces dettes, de comprendre tous ces mots et tous ces mécanismes. À Cotonou aussi, lors de l'atelier, nous avons parlé qu'il faut vraiment réformer le mécanisme des DTS du FMI. Nous avons eu la chance, que le FMI au Bénin, le représentant, il est resté du début jusqu'à la fin. Il a participé à ces travaux et on a noté au Bénin un besoin aussi bien de la part du FMI que du gouvernement d'échanger avec les acteurs de la société civile. Parce que ça a été une opportunité qui est offerte pour nous expliquer ce qui se fait. Et donc, nous avons saisi cette opportunité pour faire des recommandations. Et je pense que l'une des recommandations, c'est qu'il faut renforcer la solidarité entre les pays. Le Bénin peut être un bon exemple, mais une hirondelle ne fait pas le printemps. Nous l'avons vu ici, ça n'est pas durable si chaque pays invente son mécanisme, etc. Et je pense que ce que nous retenons, moi je retiens d'ici, c'est cette conscience, induire cette conscience sous-régionale, régionale et africaine dans la politique. Le Bénin seul ne peut pas aller loin avec ce que nous avons entendu ici. Et nous avons aussi noté qu'il faut un engagement vraiment en faveur de la transparence dans la gestion de la dette. Donner l'information à temps aux citoyens pour les mettre en capacité d'analyser, de faire leurs commentaires, de se donner une idée. Parce que ce qui nous intéresse, c'est ne pas hypothéquer le développement pour les générations à venir. Donc, je voudrais vous remercier pour l'opportunité et saluer le travail de conscience que AfCoDD nous a permis de démarrer au Bénin en matière de suivi de la dette. Merci beaucoup et voilà.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Pierre. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've heard in great detail some of the nuances of what is happening at the national level when it comes to rejuvenating and reinvigorating the national debt movement across the continent. And certainly there are some common threads that are beginning to emerge, and I think this is something that is very exciting when you listen to some of the stories from Benin, Cameroon, Zambia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, where there is an appetite, there is an opportunity that members of parliament, government officials are looking to engage. And as much as some of us remain sometimes optimistic, we also should err on the side of caution that we are not used as instruments to legitimize also processes that are not correct or are not proper. But needless to say, it's very encouraging that there is also beginning to be a coherent and coordinated message that is emerging about public participation, about the dangers of the IMF programs, about the trade-offs that our governments are having to make in favor of creditors at the expense of delivering public services to our citizens. And of course, the big elephant in the room is the way tax policy is being designed and implemented on citizens that are already overburdened with different types of taxes. So it's very exciting to hear these kind of emerging messages coming out. But at this point, I know we've only got about 10 minutes. I'd like to open it up to the floor in case there's any questions or comments or contributions that colleagues and comrades would like to make in this session with regard to what is happening in their countries. I do know that we did have other sessions in Nigeria, in Uganda, and so on. But I'd also, if you'd like to pose a question or make a comment to any of the presentations that have been made, please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. And if there are none, I know Anne-Marie would be very appreciative because, oh, there's one. Yes, please. If you could please just stand up so that we can get the mic to you.
My name is Helena Ngei from Kenya, and I'll pose my question to my beautiful sister from Kenya. Kenya is operating a devolved system of governance, which, in my opinion, is one of the factors that have driven the issue of debt and sustainability. Just to iterate that we have 3 pillars of the devolved system of governance. We have the political devolution, we have the administrative devolution, and the fiscal devolution. And there are some 2 critical elements of human development system that have been devolved. And this is the healthcare services, and the education system is also a devolved service. We are now looking at taking the healthcare services back to the national government because of the issue of the county government ability to sustain healthcare provision at the county government levels because of the issue of lack of finances. Now, if you look at what the government borrowing was for the year 2022, we surpassed the threshold. Yet we have county governments which have inadequate resources to be able to expand these services to the citizenry of the county governments. Looking again at what Jason said, we are looking at a probable default of $2 billion Eurobond in 2024. That goes without saying. There's a looming crunch in 2024. How will we be able, as a country, to sustain 47 county governments and a national government with a looming crunch and inadequate resources at the county governments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentations that you have made. My question is on this borrowing at local currency. For the past 2 days, I've had it. Many people that have presented have talked about borrowing at local currency. Now, the IMF and other credit organizations, they are not giving us this money for free. I think they too want to benefit something from it. And there's no way they will allow anybody to borrow at local currency. So my thinking is that the AU should implement the call for the African Monetary Fund so that African countries and the idea of a common currency for African countries, whereby you can borrow. Otherwise, there's no way IMF and World Bank or the bilateral institutions, China, Germany, and France, can give us loans at local currency and you pay back at local currency. No, they want to get something out of the, they have to get interest that we pay from those loans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apollinaire.
Et merci beaucoup, Monsieur Jason. Je vais essayer de parler en français. Et donc, moi, comme on parle d'activisme et de plaidoyer, je suis beaucoup intéressé par cette thématique, parce que si on écoute l'audience et les panélistes, on dirait que nous tous, vraiment, nous sommes dans un environnement où on peut faire du plaidoyer et d'activisme sans problème. Nous savons que la question de la dette, c'est une question épineuse dans certains pays et que c'est difficile de faire le plaidoyer parce que la dette va de pair avec la corruption. Certains pays recourent à la dette parce que c'est la manière la plus facile de financer les budgets, parce que mobiliser domestiquement les ressources, c'est difficile pour eux. Et donc, la dette, quand ils contractent des dettes, c'est plus facile de faire la corruption et de faire des malversations économiques. Et donc, c'est difficile pour certains activistes, en Afrique surtout. J'aimerais vous demander, à vous tous, les panélistes, quelle est la stratégie commune qu'on pourrait établir pour certains pays qui sont encore des places dangereuses pour faire le plaidoyer, parce que les outils, la conscience, la volonté, on en a, mais comment faire dans certains pays où il est encore plus dangereux de faire le plaidoyer et de plaider pour ces réformes et de demander des comptes et de la bonne gouvernance. Et je pense que c'est même le but de telles réunions au niveau continental, c'est pour établir des stratégies communes et voir comment on pourrait s'entraider les uns les autres à travers l'Afrique. Voilà.
Thank you, Apollinaire. So, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to come back to the panel here. There was one question directed to Diana about the devolution, the looming default, and how that would affect funding of the county government. But before I hand it over to respond, perhaps what I'll do is, in the interest of time, maybe we'll just also take this opportunity to give the partners to their wrap-up. So in about a minute, any closing statements based on some of the sentiments like what Apollinaire has mentioned around high risk, and then the comment around local currency as you wrap up in about 1 minute so that we can finish and hand over back to Anne-Marie to take us through the rest of the program. Bertha, please.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up by actually indicating that no hope is it was already alluded to from the previous submissions from Malawi stakeholders that in country back we still have that Malawi government has. And so mounting efforts with key stakeholders has always been an opportunity for us. She indicated the open government partnership that the Malawi government has committed to. And so we take to it as a partner that we are going to leverage. Thank you. Summatively, I'm saying not all hope is lost. We have the political will back home in the country. These are the debts contracted 2 decades ago, but the current government has the political will to engage. One side of it is the OGP commitment, which has actually 3 pillars in which Reimagine, but also other civil society organizations would like to leverage on the open parliament, the access to information, but also the pillar on anti-corruption and beneficial ownership aspect. So really, I would want to concur with your sentiments just on that collectively, this is not a battle for CSOs only. Much more that Malawi government is also going into the discussions around debt restructuring. So collective efforts going forward, it's a tool actually to win this battle. I end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. So in my wrapping, I wanted to try and respond to the question by my brother who asked about common strategies for advocacy in dangerous contexts, if I may use his words, operating in dangerous contexts. I would say that the work that we are doing is working in civil society is risky business. We are speaking to power, and it's always not a smooth walk when you are speaking truth to power. When you are trying to awaken the people, the electorate as it were, to show them the faults of those in power, you are definitely going to be seen as an enemy of those in power. So the danger is there, it's unmistakable. But I would then also say that what is important is to navigate carefully. I think our advocacy strategies must mature with time. And we cannot talk about a one-size-fits-all strategy. We are operating in different contexts. Our countries have got different legislations. The room for what would work actually in other contexts may not apply in other contexts. So it has to be suitable and contextual. That would be my response. But again, I just wanted to say that that should not limit us from learning from each other and then adapting appropriately according to context. But maybe what may be common is to speak about the costs of public debt. I consider that public debt is an international relations issue. That is one thing that is common that we can all agree on. And just raising the cost of public debt and speaking that to those in power, they would respect and attend to anything that threatens their stay in power. And therefore, I think that we can leverage around that. Lastly, just to say that there is nothing more powerful than an enlightened citizenry. I think let's invest as much as possible in building citizen agency. This generation of debt activists may not be there tomorrow, but as long as we have invested enough in building strong citizen agency around public finance management, we are assured that there is continued monitoring, continued accountability in public finance management issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll respond to two issues that were raised. And the first one is around the cost of government because of the devolved system. However, to note that the devolved system of government separates roles. It does not anticipate replication of roles. So whether you do away with the county government, we will still have health officials working at the lowest level. But if you just look at even the analysis, Kenya's budget deficit is 700 billion or thereabout, and the amount that's going to the counties is about 400 billion. So even if you did away with the counties, you would still have a deficit. Now, as the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, whereas we know government expenditure must be rationalized, we have identified that the biggest problem is misappropriation of expenditure, not so much around the human resource, but around budgeted corruption. The amount of money we lose in corruption and illicit flows over the last 10 years is higher than our annual deficit. And I think most Kenyans would agree something changed, and there has even been a decentralization of development because of devolution. So I would say let us, and Africa-wide, let us defend decentralization of power, of fiscal resources to the lowest level, because that even grows the levels of accountability. In Kenya, we see higher levels of investment by people, citizens, with county processes of budget, social accountability compared to the national level. County governments in Kenya control 15% of the national revenue and income. The national government still controls 85% and has significantly lower safeguards. Then the second area, as I close, is around, can we ever use our local currency? And all I will say is, conviction, my fellow Africans. The minute we are convicted that we are powerful enough to negotiate differently, the capital owners in their action will not outpower us. The solution may not be the currency per se, but we must be convicted enough to negotiate with the world disorder differently. Thank you.
Adding up to respond to your question in terms of potential strategies that can be used by civil society organizations, especially those that are working in quite troubled regimes or systems, I think there are some lessons that can be learned from Zambia. The immediate past regime was quite brutal, I should make mention. We had incidences where, like, some of our members of staff from my organization got arrested just for engaging stakeholders on issues around the national budget and public debt. But one of the things that we did as civil society organizations around that time was to mobilize and go to the people. And in going to the people, we decided to make the issue of public debt an election issue, more especially that we're heading towards the elections. So if there is a moment in that particular country, let's say elections, and there is room to mobilize and make public debt an election issue, I think it worked very well for us. And in our message to the public and to the people, we're basically trying to explain how public debt concerns them and helping to draw the connection in terms of debt that is acquired, its utilization, and the implications that it has on the quality of life. And we do think that it greatly contributed to the huge turn-up in terms of numbers of young people that showed up to vote, but not only voting. They went a step further in terms of wanting to protect the vote that they had casted. That is one strategy that I can recommend to civil society organizations that might find themselves in a situation or circumstance a bit similar to what happened in Zambia 2 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I wish to thank the two participants who asked the question on the local currency and on the common strategy, because they will help me wrap up here the way I wanted to do it. And then to finish, I would deliver to AfCoDD the message that people in Cameroon asked me to deliver. I think the lesson that we can learn from this, the situation, the session that we had in Cameroon is that we should now capitalize on our continental free trade area. We don't need it to be perfect, as our brother said the last time, but we need to do it now, right now, because actually the solutions lies out at our feet, and we seem to ignore it. Look, imagine that Africa, which is the continent, the richest continent in the world in terms of natural resources. Imagine that Africa decided that henceforth you will be buying our natural resources with our local currency. Imagine what would happen. All of these people who are out there, they need these natural resources. And if Africa decided that you will be buying that in our local currency, the only thing left to do is to make sure that you have a common currency in Africa. And when you've got that common currency in Africa, within the implementation of the continental free trade area, people will be forced to bring their foreign currency to come and buy the African currency because they need the natural resources. So that is the solution. I mean, we've been discussing here, I think that's the solution because we have that at our feet. So if we go that way, then you understand why we will force people, or when we borrow, we will say we are borrowing in our local currency. That local currency is not the shilling in Kenya or the naira in Nigeria. It is the African common currency. If it is the African common currency, then you can be sure that we are getting rid of this debt problem in Africa. Now, second thing about the strategy. What is the common strategy? From what we saw in Cameroon, by bringing all stakeholders together to discuss the debt situation, we realized that the best strategy for us is try to get a kind of championing within each group of stakeholders. If you identify champions, even in the governmental sector, be it a good or a bad government, if you have champions in there, you have champions in the parliament, you have champions in the private sector, and then you get with these champions to work together. And the kind of work that you do with them should be a work that gives them the knowledge that what you are bringing is to help in what they are trying to do, not to oppose them or not to be in argument with them. It is to, you must also identify what their interest is to shape your contribution according to that interest. Now to finish the message. The message that came out of the session in Cameroon, I better read it because I don't want to change it. Let me just read it. So participants in Cameroon unanimously declared Cameroon's readiness to host the next AfCoDD. And they hope that AfCoDD will permit that. And they challenged me to deliver this message. I think I've taken the challenge. Thank you.
Pour donner un essai de réponse aux collègues du Burundi, je pense que il y a un travail que la société civile doit faire, c'est d'étudier les profils de nos dirigeants. Je veux dire, d'étudier leur psychologie. Parce que l'approche qui peut aller pour un tel ne peut pas aller pour l'autre. Et nous, au Bénin, nous avons réussi à faire ce travail avec le gouvernement que nous avons là. C'est un gouvernement, si vous faites de l'activisme, vous allez à la télé, vous parlez, bon, ça leur glisse sur la peau. C'est le chien à boire, la caravane passe. Mais c'est un gouvernement qui veut que vous vous approchiez des ministères et autres pour aborder les questions. Et là, ils se sentent qu'ils n'ont pas été jetés à la place publique. Et comme mon prédécesseur l'a dit, nous devons avoir des entrées, donc même au niveau du gouvernement, au niveau du Parlement, des points d'entrée sur lesquels nous devons nous fonder, nous appuyer pour faire passer nos messages. Et pour finir, je pense que ces jours-ci, nous avons constaté aussi dans ces salles combien l'Afrique est divisée. Combien l'Afrique est divisée. Il y a beaucoup... Les devises, par exemple, chaque pays a sa monnaie. Au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, la CEDEAO, nous disons que nous devons avoir une monnaie commune. Et ce processus est repoussé à chaque fois, ou bien même saboté de l'intérieur de la CEDEAO par des chefs d'État. Et donc, c'est la question de... Nous sommes réunis sur des questions ici qui nous dépassent en tant que pays isolés, mais qui ne peuvent être portées que par une unité de une union, donc pas comment on appelle l'Union africaine, donc des pays unis, et parce que l'Afrique est très divisée. Et dans cette division, ceux qui n'ont pas intérêt à ce que ceux qui ont intérêt à ce que nous soyons toujours sous domination sont contents. Et je pense tout ce qu'on dit sur la dette. Comment parler de la dette, par exemple, sans aussi parler des thèmes de l'échange qui ne sont pas bons? Nous produisons les matières premières, mais nous ne pouvons pas aussi les transformer sur place. Donc, c'est un ensemble de problématiques qu'il faudrait adresser en faisant encore appel à l'unité africaine. Qu'une seule hirondelle ne peut pas faire le printemps. Et pour finir, au niveau interne, donc, nous devons améliorer nos politiques budgétaires. En tout cas, c'est ce qui se fait au Bénin. Améliorer la politique budgétaire, accroître chaque pays, accroître la mobilisation des ressources internes. Pour limiter notre dépendance à l'extérieur, il faut accroître la mobilisation des ressources internes. Et pour finir, pour que le citoyen soit heureux de constater les ressources mobilisées à l'extérieur ont servi à quelque chose, il faut que nous améliorons aussi l'efficacité des dépenses. L'efficacité des dépenses et que nous investissions massivement dans les secteurs, comme je l'avais dit, l'énergie, la santé, l'éducation, l'agriculture. Et donc, c'est sur ces mots d'appel à l'unité des pays africains, des décideurs et même la société civile, parce que c'est la société civile ici réunie qui doit pouvoir remonter ce besoin, cette nécessité d'unité de notre continent. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. A round of applause for the entire panel, please. Thank you once again. Thank you all very much. I'm now going to hand over to Anne-Marie to take us through the next two sessions till the close. Thank you all very much.